Howdy, everybody. Good evening. Good to see all of you. Just opened this up, so folks are starting to pile in. I'm going to give it another probably minute and a half for folks to get signed on, and then we'll get started. But really happy to see all of you. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation tonight on the new Wild Scenic Rivers bill. Hi, everybody. If you're just joining, we're just going to wait another minute to get everyone signed in and ready to go, but we're happy to have you today. I see some familiar names in the attendees list. Good to see a bunch of you, even if I can't see you in person. Okay, it is 6:02. So I'm going to go ahead and get rolling, and then I'll just let the rest of the participants join us as they come in. But thanks again for joining us tonight for this look at the new Wild and Scenic Rivers bill that Senator Ron Wyden and Senator Jeff Merkley recently introduced last week, the River Democracy Act. This is a really exciting time for rivers in Oregon, and I'm a river lover, so I'm especially excited. If you don't know me, my name is Jamie Dawson. I'm the public lands campaigner for Oregon Wild, based in our Bend field office. And if you're new to Oregon Wild, we are a statewide conservation organization that's dedicated to protecting and restoring Oregon's wildlands, wildlife, and waters as a lasting legacy for all Oregonians. A brief overview of our program tonight. This webcast is 1 hour and is being recorded. So if you want to share it with friends or family, you'll have access to a recording tomorrow. I'm going to be joined by several of my colleagues tonight, including Eric Fernandez, who works with me in the Bent office, John Legui, who works in our Eugene office, and Jenna Goodman-Campbell, who is with the Oregon Natural Desert Association here in Bend. After the presentation, we're going to roll into Q&A, and you can enter your question at any point in the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. So if something comes up in the middle of a presentation, feel free to put that in there as soon as you think of it. Don't wait until the end to ask your question, because there's always a big rush and we can't get to all of them. So feel free to ask your question whenever you're ready. And as I mentioned, we are going to be recording this webcast. So if you RSVP'd for it, which you obviously did because you're here, you'll get a copy of this recording tomorrow. And we're also going to post it on our website, OregonWild.org. And it'll be posted in our Wild blog section. If you have any tech issues at some point, all you have to do is just close completely out of this webcast and then go back to that link in your email that you clicked to get here. Just try opening it back up, and that works for most people. But if for some reason you're still having an issue, put a question in the Q&A box and I can try and help you out there. I know a lot of folks bought raffle tickets tonight, which we really appreciate. It helps us keep this, keep the lights on and make sure that we can continue doing programs like this and continue to work to protect rivers in Oregon. Some folks bought raffle tickets right before the presentation started. So we are going to sort that out tomorrow. So watch your email inbox for a message from us if you were one of our raffle winners. And this, of course, is part of an ongoing series of webcasts that we do weekly. Next week's presentation is also really exciting. It's a presentation on breaking ground on the Blue Mountains Trail. So we're going to be teaming up with our friends at the Greater Hells Canyon Council in Northeastern Oregon to learn more about the Blue Mountains Trail, which is it's still in development, but it's a 566-mile trail that connects Joseph to John Day, and traverses all 7 wilderness areas in Northeastern Oregon. It's something that I'm hoping to put on my list for a few years from now. So yeah, signups are on our website, OregonWild.org now. It's live, and hope you can join us. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Eric Fernandez, who is our Wilderness Program Manager, and he'll get us started.
Great, thanks, Jamie. Just get my screen share going here. 1 second. Does that look like it's?
Looks great.
You, Jamie? All right.
Yep.
All right. Well, yeah. So as Jamie mentioned, I'm Eric Fernandez. I'm with Oregon Wild in our Bend office, and have been working on this legislation. Very excited about it. So let's just dive right in. And this is our first look at this legislation, which was just introduced in Congress last week, the River Democracy Act of 2021. So let's just dive right in. So I think the question of what exactly is a wild and scenic river? What does it do? What does it mean? Starting out with the fundamentals there. So it takes an act of Congress in order to designate a wild and scenic river. And that process was what was started last week when Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley introduced the legislation. And so it now has to kind of move through that congressional process where introduced in the House, introduced in the Senate, go through committee, final votes, and then signed by the president. So it's not an overnight process, but that also means that it's a meaningful process that isn't undone overnight either. So it's a strong level of conservation, and this is really good news for clean drinking water, wildlife, fish, public lands, recreation, to see this process started in Congress to protect some of the best and most important rivers in Oregon. So a very exciting time. So now when a wild and scenic river is protected by Congress, that means that there is a buffer of protection around that river. And that corridor of protection, it used to be a quarter mile on either side of the river. It can also be half a mile. Oregon started doing more of the half-mile buffers in 1996, largely in recognition that based on the science for how you most effectively protect water quality, you can't just protect a thin strip along the river. You need to protect a healthy corridor along that river in order to really provide enough shade and avoid erosion and protect those areas. And those corridors end up, the forests in those corridors are really good at storing carbon. So it's really helpful on the climate change front. And these corridors can become wildlife migration corridors. So a lot of benefits to this that go beyond just the water in the river. So now I think the crux of the question when it comes to wild and scenic rivers is, what does protection mean? And it really ties closely to this term here. You'll see the outstandingly remarkable values. That's the technical term. These are identified either by Congress or after the bill passes in the management plan that the Forest Service or the BLM put together. And they're really important. Once a river is designated, those values that are identified can't be degraded. So those values could be fish, it could be wildlife, it could be clean water, it could be recreation, scenery, geology, any number of those values. And so what it means when we say protected is those values that are identified can't be degraded. So in practice, what does that look like? That means you're not going to see in these river corridors aggressive clear-cut logging of old-growth forest, that kind of thing. There is some flexibility there. It's not quite as strong a protection as, say, a national park designation or a wilderness designation. So there is a little bit of flexibility, but it does a pretty good job of protecting the clean drinking water, wildlife, habitat, fish, and recreation values there. So those are you might hear that term moving forward, outstandingly remarkable values, ORVs, when we're talking fast and using acronyms. So what's allowed and encouraged in these river corridors? You can go hiking, hunting, camping, fishing, rafting, canoeing, kayaking, trail running, bird watching, you name it. All those low impact activities are not just allowed, but encouraged. And that's great to see. I think the pandemic that we're in has really given us all a newfound appreciation for what it means to be able to escape from some of the scary realities to nature. And so being able to get that peace of mind to disconnect from the doom scrolling on your phone and really find some peace and solitude, hopefully on a river. This is good news for those who have an appreciation or a need for that and the healing that offers, not just the peace of mind and recreation. But so that's kind of what's allowed. There's probably a lot of other questions as far as what's allowed. but we'll maybe cover whatever I'm not getting here when we get to Q&A. One of the other primary things is no dams are allowed, and then mining. It becomes a lot more difficult to mine in a wild and scenic river. If you have a valid mining claim, that is still valid, and you could still mine in it. But wild and scenic rivers, you can't put in new mining claims. So that is one of the other safeguards that comes with that, and that's good news for the health of the river. And private lands, that's another question that comes up. What does this mean if there's a wild and scenic river designation on private lands? It doesn't mean anything, really. There's specific language in the legislation that clarifies it doesn't change anything about what you can and can't do on your private lands. And the vast majority of rivers in this bill are just on public lands, Forest Service and BLM lands. So how did we get here? Or how did we get to last week? About a couple of years ago, as you can see here, Senator Wyden announced that he was having a nomination process and wanted to hear from Oregonians all across the state. Anyone who wanted to weigh in could offer a nomination for their favorite river and suggest that it be protected and designated as wild and scenic. It was a cross section of people from across the state participated. You can see a photo of the town hall here. People with cowboy hats attended. This guy here in the front is my neighbor, 10 years old, probably the most experienced river rafter in that age bracket. He was excited about protecting more rivers. So a lot of folks from around the state participated in this. There was a pretty robust couple of town halls that Senator Wyden hosted. There was a public comment period, like an email address. You could send in your nominations that way. I've seen on other town halls that he's hosted since he was getting feedback there. So this was very much a grassroots process that has been going on for the last few years. And then based on that, what we saw last week was legislation that came out of that nomination and vetting process they went through. And so here we see a map of what they have proposed for wild and scenic protection. So just to walk you through the map here real briefly, this tan color here you see, this is the public lands, the BLM lands. This lighter green color is Forest Service land. And then these blue lines are proposed wild and scenic rivers. And these light purple lines, these are already protected wild and scenic rivers. So 4,700 miles of new wild and scenic rivers have been proposed. That sounds like a lot, and I promise I won't throw too many numbers at you. But to give a little bit of context, there are a lot of streams and rivers in Oregon. We have 110 miles of streams in Oregon. If you include all of them from big rivers to little creeks, that's 110,000 miles. So currently on the map here, you can see these light purple protected lines. That only shows up as 2% of all of the rivers in Oregon that have been protected as wild and scenic. And even if this legislation that was introduced last week went through without any changes, that would only really bump the statistics, the percentage up to about 6% of Oregon's rivers getting protection. It would be the best and some of the most important and charismatic and sources of clean drinking water and everything. So those are really important rivers, but just wanted to give a little bit of context. As you can see, this map here shows all of those streams, and it's just a blob of blue because when you look at a map of this scale, all those rivers, they're just so dense packed, places like the Coast Range and elsewhere. It's just wall to wall, other than a few places here kind of in central and southeast Oregon where there's no streams whatsoever. So there's a little bit of context for you on the map front. And then, you might be wondering, how popular is wild and scenic river protection? And, we all understand politics and how politics works. Proposals that are popular and have bipartisan support have a much better chance of moving through Congress. For wild and scenic rivers, a poll was done by Zogby just a little over a month ago, I think. And 87% of Oregonians support new wild and scenic river protections. And that includes 75% of Republicans. I don't think I've seen anything poll this well since they polled on, do you like potato chips? So this is really popular type of thing. I think people understand, again, and to kind of point to the pandemic here, we have a newfound appreciation for the fundamentals in life, like clean water, the basics. And I think people recognize we should protect those fundamentals of life. So not surprisingly, that comes through in the polls. So that's my quick little bit of background on what a wild and scenic river is and does, and the River Democracy Act that was just introduced. I think we're going to now transition and do a little bit of you have a couple of tour guides coming up to show you some amazing photos of rivers around the state here. And so I'm going to hand it over to my esteemed colleague, Chandra Legui from Eugene. Chandra, if you're ready, I'm going to stop screen sharing and turn it over to you.
Yes, sir. 1 second here. Thanks, Eric, for that great overview. Let me find my right screen. Okay, does that look like a Coast Range stream?
Looks good.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, we're breaking up our tour of the proposed wild and scenic rivers in Senator Wyden's new bill into regions. So I get to do the first 4, so bear with me. So I'm going to start in the upper northwest corner of the state with the coast and the Coast Range. And I'll be honest, when I think of the Coast Range, I don't automatically think of pristine, intact waterways, just because so much of coastal watersheds and their salmon runs have been fragmented and degraded by logging and roads. But that's honestly what makes the free-flowing, salmon-producing, forest-lined streams in the Coast Range that are proposed in this bill so vitally important. These corridors that they provide are some of the last strongholds of wild nature, habitat for threatened coho salmon and marbled murrelets, and spectacular groves of old-growth trees. So you can see in this this is Senator Wyden's map that I've just kind of cut into pieces. So you can see the proposed wild and scenic rivers in blue and the existing wild and scenic rivers in purple on this map. So up in the northern part of the Coast Range lies the Nasuka River, which already has some of its upper stretches designated as wild and scenic. And the bill would add some more of the main stem of the Nasuka further downstream, as well as several tributaries that you can see, that little congregation of blue there, that provide clean, cold water for this really important fishery. The Nasuka River corridor is also really popular for all sorts of recreation, since it's not too far from the major hub of Tillamook on the coast. Moving a little further south, one of the more intact watersheds that are left in the Coast Range is Drift Creek near Lincoln City. There's still incredible old growth forest habitat along this stream, as well as some of its tributaries. With old growth forests, several species of native fish that use, this beautiful stream like you see here, and a lot of great ways to recreate in this watershed, including hiking to 75-foot Drift Creek Falls, if anyone's ever been there. It's a pretty cool spot with a big suspension bridge. I can't have pictures of everything. If you've ever looked for a shortcut between the Willamette Valley and Waldport, you might have found the beautiful scenic byway that travels along the South Fork of the Alsea River. There's about 15 miles or so where this river flows through Bureau of Land Management land. It's a popular recreation corridor. There's Alsea Falls and some other trails in that area. There's mountain bike trails nearby. I like to go mushroom hunting in this corridor, but other people enjoy it for the trails and for steelhead and salmon runs that this river supports. And then moving further south and over right on the coast, a really exciting addition to the wild and scenic river system that's proposed in this bill are the truly unique streams that flow through the Oregon Dune ecosystem. This is one of my favorite places. I'm in Eugene, so it's a little easier for me to get to this section of the coast. But this area is where shifting sand and water really form this landscape in a unique way. It supports rare species and incredible recreation. You can take a leisurely paddle, walk out to the ocean along these streams, and really kind of get away from it all in these streams that are proposed. This is Tumalo Creek, but there's a few others that just are short little streams and rivers that flow out to the ocean. All right, I'm going to move over into the Cascades region. So some of Oregon's most iconic rivers flow out of the Cascades, as probably a lot of you already know, and into the Willamette River. So many of the main stems of these rivers already have some stretches designated as wild and scenic, on the Clackamas, for example, or the Upper Mackenzie. But their headwater streams and the major tributaries for a lot of these river systems are not protected as wild and scenic rivers. These streams flow from glaciers and high elevation springs out of protected wilderness areas. So they really provide cold, clean water that's essential for native salmon and steelhead and trout, and connecting, ancient forests and wildlife habitat all the way from the Willamette Valley up to tree line in the Cascades. The Western Cascade river systems also provide drinking water for most of the state's population. Sitting in Eugene, that's what I drink. These headwater streams are providing the best water that they can, or that's available anywhere really, filtered through forests on national forest lands that feeds, Eugene, Salem, Oregon City, and many other communities. And as the climate warms and change, rainfall patterns and snow patterns change, these headwater streams will become even more important for providing a steady source of clean water to downstream communities. These river corridors in the Western Cascades are also what really connects the major population hubs of Oregon to recreation. If you're from the Willamette Valley, you go up these river corridors to hike, to mountain bike, to raft and kayak, just to drive, to get to hot springs, whatever it is you like to do. So these rivers are really the highlights for much of our recreation. So I would be remiss in to not mention that several of the proposed rivers and streams in this bill also happen to have been impacted by this year's fires, and that's mostly in this Cascades region. In this picture here of the Oak Grove Fork of the Clackamas River, this burned as part of the Riverside fire, and it happens to be part of this proposal. But as you'll see through a couple of other slides, fire has impacted a lot of the proposed rivers this year. But that does not mean that these rivers' incredible recreational, ecological, and fisheries values are gone or even negatively impacted. Some might even argue that they're enhanced. There's a lot of evidence that after a fire, if allowed to recover naturally, fisheries can have see a lot of positive benefits. So. Moving south out of the Clackamas, one of the drainages featured in the bill is the Brighton Bush. So the area where the North Fork, the South Fork, and Devil's Creek come together near the Brighton Bush hot springs got caught in this year's fires, as well as a fire in 2017. So if you've ever hiked around in that hot springs area or by the summer cabins, the rivers and streams there, you'll know the rivers and streams there are really, really wild. They flood, they take out bridges on a regular basis, and they stand kind of in stark contrast to the warm, calm pool area of the Brighton Bush hot springs. This area is going to look very different from this picture on the left, for example, and for many years. In part because of the pretty aggressive hazard tree removal that's ongoing in the summer home cabin area. All of the cabins unfortunately burned. And Brighton Bush is gonna, have to rebuild a lot of infrastructure before the recreation will be the same. but the rivers in this area are going to be just as wild and provide, amazing water quality into the future, regardless of the fact that they burned this year. One part of the Santiam Basin that didn't burn this year that I want to highlight is the Middle Santiam River and Pyramid Creek, which flows into it. Absolutely stunning rivers up there that I got to discover for the first time this summer. I can guarantee you that this gorgeous looking swimming hole is far too cold to swim in unless you're very hardy, but just absolutely beautiful river that is very much deserving of this protection. And then there's the Mackenzie in my backyard. So part of the Upper Mackenzie is designated as wild and scenic in that popular area near Sahaley Falls. But its headwaters, including Clear Lake, which is pictured here, where the Mackenzie sort of springs out of the earth into the lake, and other headwater tributaries like Owyhee Creek, which is shown here, are not protected yet, but they are included in this proposal, along with some of the big Mackenzie tributaries like the South Fork Mackenzie and Blue River. So that's exciting to think about more of this really precious water system or river system being protected. Now, most of that is all above where the Holiday Farm fire burned this year. But an important stretch of the river that is included in this proposal flows through Bureau of Land Management, BLM land, further downstream of Blue River. So this picture is of my friend Eric, and he and his wife Tish lost a home right here where I'm standing in the Holiday Farm fire. And they're directly across the river from this BLM land, near where two tributaries flow into the Mackenzie. And, they're pretty, they lost a lot, and they don't want to see the forest lost around them either. So they're really glad to see this proposal and hope that the BLM lands in this area are protected as wild and scenic, in part, hopefully, that they will be spared the fate of some of the other forests in the Mackenzie that are being heavily logged right now. Eric still goes up here even without a house to fly fish in this really spectacular stretch. All right, and one last Cascades River as we move south, and that's the Upper Middle Fork Willamette. There's a world-class recreation trail along many miles of this beautiful river. Wolves make their home in the upper headwaters, and it is rarely crowded. So it is one of my faves. This spot here on the Middle Fork burned in a fire in 2009. And so it's a great example of how the forest, recovers naturally, how there's still great recreation opportunities, how the water is still beautifully pristine. A few of the Middle Fork's major tributaries, like Salt Creek, which is home of the beautiful Salt Creek Falls up near Willamette Pass, are also included in this proposal. Okay, and then we'll move into the Umpqua Basin, a little farther south. And this region actually stretches from the Cascades all the way to the coast. The Umpqua River starts high up in the Cascades and cuts all the way to the ocean. About 34 miles of the North Umpqua River is already protected as wild and scenic. You can see it in this purple stretch right down here to the right. And it's known for its fish, recreation, scenery, and water quality. Those are the values that the North Umpqua has been protected for. It's really popular for rafting, fishing, and hiking. And fire is, again, a theme in this drier region in the Umpqua. There's several stretches of the Wild and Scenic River corridor that have burned in fires over the past 10, 20 years, makes those values no less important. This bill would add some more upstream stretches of the North Umpqua and tributaries, including areas popular for recreation, like the area around Toketee Falls. And one of my favorites, the area around Twin Lakes, which is in the middle of the Calf Copeland roadless area. That's a big wild area that overlooks wilderness to a couple sides. That's from this picture, you're looking at Boulder Creek Wilderness, and the streams that flow off of this sort of ridge line at Twin Lakes are included in this Wild and Scenic Rivers proposal. Wonderful home for lots of wildlife because they're just, you know, big wild places that surround these streams. And then there's Steamboat and Canton Creeks, which flow into the North Umpqua Wild and Scenic River section further downstream. And these are widely recognized as being the best steelhead streams in the Umpqua Basin. Part of these watersheds are included in the Frank and Jeannie Moore Wild Steelhead Special Management Area that was designated a couple of years ago. But Wild and Scenic River designation would expand protections for the area and be an important step in ensuring that this wild steelhead sanctuary remains intact. Now I'm going to jump to the far downstream portion of the Umpqua watershed real quick, to the Smith River. And the Smith River cuts through the Coast Range through Bureau of Land Management lands, as well as a mixture of private timberlands. And one of Oregon's newest wild and scenic rivers, Wasson Creek, that flows through the Devil's Staircase Wilderness, flows into the Smith, as does the North Fork of the Smith. So the North Fork of the Smith is on the left-hand side in this picture, at the confluence where Kentucky Creek comes in. So these two beautiful waterfalls, Kentucky, just known as Kentucky Creek Falls, is absolutely spectacular. Kentucky Creek is also included in this proposal. And then you can follow this trail downstream along the North Fork Smith through spectacular old growth forest to as it goes through the Siuslaw National Forest, and then eventually to the Smith and out into the Umpqua River. Okay, last region, down into the Southwest Oregon. So Southwest Oregon is already known as the Wild Rivers Coast, but with such a high density of streams in the area, only a small percentage are actually protected as wild and scenic, even though, as you can see in this map, there's a lot of purple. Those are existing wild and scenic rivers. Small fraction of what's actually there and eligible for wild and scenic protection. So the area is known for, the Rogue River and the Illinois River and the Chetco River as wild and scenic. But there's just so much more going on in this area. It's home to the Kalmiopsis wilderness and a huge amount of biodiversity just because of the area's unique geology and geography. I will not pretend to be an expert on this region or all of the rivers here, though I have enjoyed many of them, many of the ones that are proposed in this bill. Just to name a couple, so in addition to the Rogue River, the Illinois, just a bit further south, cuts through the heart of this region and the Kalmiopsis wilderness and the big roadless areas around it. This bill includes some of the Illinois' major tributaries that help make recreation and tourism a driver for this area's economy. One of these is Indigo Creek, which is shown here. I think Eric already showed this picture, but it's a good one. Further up in the Illinois watershed, there's the headwaters of the Applegate River, including the Middle Fork that are included in this bill, and also upper reaches of the Illinois itself, like the West Fork, Illinois. All of these are included as they flow north off the Siskiyou Crest into the Illinois Valley and eventually as Illinois cuts its way to the coast. So really cool rivers, and definitely not enough time to show you pictures of all of their beauty. But I'm going to stop there. Stop sharing my screen and turn it over to back over to Jamie.
Thank you. I have a lot of places to add to my list after watching your presentation. I'm like, I think I've got a good, hopefully 50 to 70 years left before I am dead. Okay, let me get my screen ready here. Okay. You see it?
Looks good.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to try and do a very, very brief overview of Northeast and Central Oregon. We want to have plenty of time for Q&A, so I might buzz through Northeastern Oregon also especially quick, just because I am not the expert in this region. But when I think about Northeastern Oregon, I think just big, wild, amazing landscapes. I moved to Oregon from Alaska, and before that I was in Montana. And when I need a good dose of big, wild places, Northeastern Oregon is where I go. It has the deepest canyon in North America. It has the largest wilderness in our state. And it has our only known moose and wolverine, and the oldest evidence of human settlement in North America. So it's really a super impressive area. One of the things that strikes me as incredibly important about this part of the state is that it is just it is like a mega wildlife corridor. If you think about all of our favorite migratory species, whether they're big game animals, whether they're wolves, wolverines, fisher, like they are coming through this area, and all migratory roads lead through Northeastern Oregon. And the creeks and streams and rivers that kind of crisscross this landscape are what connects all these migratory corridors. So I'm going to highlight just a couple quick ones. This one is Wildcat Creek, which is a really important tributary to the Grand Ronde River. The water that's flowing into the Grand Ronde from Wildcat Creek is flowing out of a beautiful wet forest. And like a bunch of other small tributaries in Eastern Oregon, it provides really important clean and cold water that helps keep the temperature of these bigger rivers low, which is what a lot of our really important native fish need to survive. Another highlight in this area is the South Fork Umatilla, which is one of the few places in Oregon where moose live. And you know, a lot of folks who live in Oregon don't actually know that we even have moose, but it's because they love to be very antisocial and hide up in this corner of the state where they know they have lots of access to, you know, public lands and waters, and they can get away from folks. Skookum Creek is another great example of just like big wild landscape, really important waterway that is feeding cool, clean water into bigger rivers that are also really important, like the North Fork John Day, which is a river that I have on my list as a place to hopefully visit and finally get my raft or my pack raft out later this spring. So I think the values in this area, you know, just big, wild, amazing, very important, like ecologically, and then of course recreational values too. And speaking of recreation, you know, the place that I live in Bend, so I think mostly about Central Oregon. We are a recreational hub, and our economy really depends on that. I'm sure you've seen numbers from the state before, but I mean, in 2019, our recreation industry, outdoor industry, generated 224,000 jobs and 15.6 billion with a B dollars in consumer spending, and a lot of that is happening in Central Oregon. And that happens because we have beautiful places like Tumalo Creek. Tumalo Creek is one of the spots that I was really excited to nominate. It is the drinking water watershed between Tumalo and Bridge Creeks for the city of Bend. So this is where some of my drinking water is coming from. This is where the water for my favorite breweries is coming from. And it is such a beloved hotspot for recreation, for tourism, folks to come and visit. I mean, look at this Tumalo Falls. If you haven't been there, it's like the poster child for cool things to come see when you come to Central Oregon. And Tumalo Creek was nominated by a middle school class here in Bend. They actually got on the front page of the paper because they had done a citizen science project. They were going and monitoring water quality in Tumalo Creek. And what they wrote in the nomination letter that I saw was that we believe that Tumalo Creek should be designated as wild and scenic because it represents everything that we love in Bend: the beautiful outdoors, being with friends, family, and having fun. It was just a nice, light, reminder that rivers are really important to folks of all ages for a lot of reasons. Another spot in Central Oregon that I'm so excited about that's included in this bill is the Fall River If you've been there, you will never forget it. It has like the cleanest water I have seen, clearest water. Also clean, but incredibly clear water. Like it's a fly fishing hotspot. It's a place that I've gone and just been thwarted so many times because those fish can see you, and you have to be on top of your game. But it's a beautiful spot. It's, again, I keep using this word tributary, like a stream or river that feeds an even bigger stream or river. The Fall River literally bubbles up from the ground like a lot of Central Oregon rivers and streams do, and it's incredibly cold, clean, clear water, which is something that our native fish need to be successful, and that water runs into the Deschutes. And then finally, we've got Deep Creek, which was a spot that I was really excited to nominate. Deep Creek is a tributary of the North Fork Crooked River, which is up in the Ochoco Mountains, northeast of Bend, outside of Prineville. And the Deep Creek system is really important. You probably know that red band trout are an incredibly hardy fish. They can live in really, relatively speaking, like pretty tough conditions. And Deep Creek and kind of the creek and river system around it, that's some of the best contiguous, connected red band trout habitat that we have in the entire Crooked River Basin. And so, usually when you think wild and scenic, you think like has to be huge, have to be able to take my raft on it. Like my raft might need to get flipped over because the water's so big and rowdy. Deep Creek is a great example of a smaller water body that is so important that it absolutely deserves protection because it's a nursery for fish. This is a red band trout that my partner Tyler caught when we were fishing there once. And streams like Deep Creek, all of these tributaries, they act as the nursery where the native fish will go spawn and rear, they'll raise their young, and then those fish will eventually make their way out to a place like the Deschutes and become really big and beautiful. So very fast and furious, but there's a lot to be excited about in Northeastern Oregon and in Central Oregon, and I'm really looking forward to seeing this bill get passed. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to my friend and colleague Jenna, who is also thinking about this high desert landscape.
Thanks, Jamie.
Yeah, you bet.
So I'm going to pick up where Jamie left off in Central Oregon. Thanks for including me, folks at Oregon Wild, to talk about the desert half of our state. We're really excited to see lots of proposed wild and scenic rivers in Oregon's high desert. And just like Jamie said, these don't have to be big raging rivers like you see here with the Owyhee River, which is included in the bill, the lower Owyhee River. They can also be smaller forks of bigger rivers and even little desert streams. So we've got them all represented in this bill. I'll start out with the South Fork Crooked River. I'm going to talk about a couple of rivers and creeks that are really near and dear to my heart, where I've spent a ton of time and that I personally nominated. And then I'll tell you about one proposed wild and scenic river that's actually a cluster of lots of little creeks where I've never been, but I'm hopefully going to be able to visit there soon and make some memories to share with you next time I'm presenting to you all. So real quick here, the South Fork Crooked River, I'll go back to my map. It's located east of Prineville on BLM land, middle of the South Fork Crooked River wilderness study area. It's pretty remote and hard to get to. There aren't a lot of access points. There's no trailhead, so it's a really wild landscape. You can see here it flows through a beautiful basalt canyon, lots of native plants, and it's really an oasis in an otherwise very dry region. ONDA has a restoration portion of our mission. We get hundreds of volunteers out into the high desert every year. I guess I should have introduced myself. I'm Jenna Goodman Campbell. I am the stewardship director for ONDA, and so I'm thrilled to be, leading our restoration and stewardship program right now, and I'm hoping to get volunteers out this year in a different way than we have before. But here you see some volunteers planting native plants along the Crooked River, or South Fork Crooked River. Over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, volunteers have planted over 20,000 plants on the South Fork and spent thousands of hours out there. And I'm really happy to report that dozens of these volunteers who've been out on the South Fork actually stepped up and nominated the South Fork for wild and scenic designation. It's a place that, you know, honestly, some parts of the South Fork on the public lands are not in the best shape. They've been pretty hammered by cattle grazing and wild horses or feral horses and other uses. And you know, I think it's a place that really teaches us that it's not just the current state of a river that makes it wild, it's the potential for it to flourish if we give it a chance and we really protect it and restore it. So I'm really excited to see what the South Fork can become as a wild and scenic river when it's given the attention and stewardship that it really deserves. Now moving on to another creek that has had a lot of restoration and where I've spent probably the most time out of any river or creek in all of Oregon, and that's Lower Whiteshoes Creek. You can see here it's north of Bend, kind of just northwest of Terrebonne. And the upper portion of Whiteshoes Creek is that purple cluster that you see up just kind of northwest of Bend. And that is already designated as a wild and scenic river. It flows out of the glaciers on Broken Top in the Cascades, Central Cascades here in Central Oregon, down through the town of Sisters, and then through some private land and onto preserves where there has been a ton of restoration by the Upper Deschutes Watershed Council and the Deschutes Land Trust, who now own large portions of Lower Whiteshoes Creek and have done an incredible job really bringing this creek back to being kind of its full glory of salmon and steelhead spawning habitat that it has been in the past. Here's just a little flowing creek to get our minds kind of into the right spot to talk about this amazing place. For those of you who have maybe had the chance to hike the Alder Springs Trail here in Central Oregon, that's the stretch of the creek that we're talking about that is in the bill. So back in December of 2019, might be a little bit shocking to see this picture of so many people close together without masks on, but this was back in December of 2019. Had the great privilege of taking a high school, the Bend High School Environmental Club out to Lower Whiteshoes Creek to tour some of the restoration that's happened there. They were learning about river and creek restoration in their environmental science class with their teacher, who's here on the left, and they ended up nominating Whiteshoes Creek. And then at a town hall meeting that Senator Wyden held in December of 2019, Sydney, one of the members of the club, presented on behalf of the club. She did a fantastic job. I think you can see here the audience was pretty riveted by her speech, and got to meet the senator afterward. And he told her that day that, you know, he would strongly consider putting this in the bill. And I was really thrilled when I was searching through the bill text when we first got it to see that Whiteshoes Creek was included. So here's a picture of Lower Whiteshoes Creek right before its confluence with the Wild and Scenic Deschutes River. And this is a really amazing, powerful spot. Salmon and steelhead are finally returning to the Upper Deschutes watershed after you know, many decades after they were extirpated from the watershed by the construction of a couple of dams downstream. And so it's really exciting to see them coming back and to know that they're coming back to a creek that is restored and hopefully will be protected soon. Here's just a zoomed out shot of that amazing, powerful place where Whiteshoes Creek joins the Middle Deschutes River. And then finally, I'll just end really quickly with a little teaser for those of you who are maybe not as familiar with Southeast Oregon, Trout Creek in Oregon Canyon Mountains. It's one of the wildest places in Oregon. It's incredibly remote, and it's just as Jamie was saying, you know, one of those really big, wild, vast landscapes. Here is, I believe this is a fork of Oregon Canyon Creek. This is one of the proposed wild and scenic rivers that's actually the whole watershed that's proposed. It's the Oregon Canyon and Oregon Canyon proposed wild and scenic river and the Trout Creek Mountains proposed wild and scenic river. So it includes lots of smaller desert creeks that are critically important for a number of reasons, but especially because Willow Creek, which is shown here, and Whitehorse Creek and the other tributaries to these little creeks are home to the Willow Whitehorse Basin cutthroat trout
Me.
I think we got one more slide before we get to Q&A.
Oh, not me. Just kidding.
All right, let me get my screen share going here. There we go. Okay, does that look right?
It's not in presentation mode.
All
Yep.
right.
Looks good.
Okay, great. So, I think as we round out our tour, that was fun and inspiring. So many more rivers to go see this summer. But I think, one of the takeaways I have here is there are a lot of rivers at stake, a lot of really important rivers, great places to visit and recreate. But these rivers aren't going to protect themselves. If we think the job is done now, a lot of these rivers might fall out of the bill. So we've got to make sure that we are truly rallied across the state in support of these rivers. And I think one of the first steps we can take along those lines is letting Senators Wyden and Merkley know that we appreciate their efforts standing up to protect these critical rivers all across Oregon. So I've got the phone numbers there for them. And we also have a quick and easy thank you email you can send to them right at the link on the screen there. And if you don't have time to copy that down or memorize it, you could just go to the Oregon Wild website and it's on the homepage there, pretty easy to find, and just send them a thank you. This is, politics isn't easy and they're gonna have to work to get this through Congress. So the more we can let them know that we are supporting their efforts and with them, all the better. Other ways you can get involved, write a letter to the editor. There were a number of articles in newspapers throughout the state over this past week. And so that's always a good opportunity to send in a letter to the editor as a response. And it can just stating some of those simple concepts of why you love rivers and why you value them. Is that where you get your clean drinking water? Or is that your favorite place to go kayaking or rafting or mountain biking or trail running? Or is it your primary concern climate change and you think these are important corridors for climate change as far as wildlife, migration corridors, and or forest carbon storage? Whatever your motivation is for protecting rivers, put it in a letter to the editor and CC it to Senators Wyden and Merkley so they know it's being sent as well. And then again, also goes without saying, but certainly helps to support and become a member of organizations like ONDA and Oregon Wild or your other favorite fish group. There are a lot of folks who across the state, organizations, individuals who have nominated rivers and are working to build support. So get involved one way or the other. Feel free to reach out to any of us on this presentation to try to find what way you want to be able to engage and help show your support. And just go out and enjoy a river and celebrate. This is good news for our rivers. So a lot of work to do to make sure they get across the finish line and get protected. But we should enjoy some of this by a river, maybe with some hot chocolate because it looks like it's going to be cold the next few days. Couple other things, if you want to check these out, on the left here is the artist is selling some original prints of different wild and scenic river, proposed wild and scenic rivers around Oregon, and some of the proceeds go to support Oregon Wild. And then on the right side of your screen there, you'll see the book that Chandra wrote, which is Hiking Oregon's Ancient Forests. And a bunch of those hikes actually, not coincidentally, are along wild and scenic rivers. Some of our best hikes and best old growth forests are along rivers. And so they're exciting to see that they might get some protection in this. So check out the book, buy some art, go for a hike, check out a river. And on that note, I think we are ready for Q&A. And for that, I'm going to stop my screen share, and now we'll turn it over to Jamie.
Right, I'm back. Okay, there are a lot of questions. We are going to try and get to as many as we can within the next 5 to 10 minutes, but we're not going to keep people too long. Some of them, this is maybe an aggregate of many questions that I'm trying to summarize into one, so it doesn't sound quite verbatim like what you typed. No, I'm trying to help out multiple people at once. And also, this bill is still really new to us and to you, so we will try and answer them to the best of our ability, but there may be some things that we just don't know the answer to yet, and we're happy to look it up and get back to folks. I guess this first question I would summarize just generally as how were these rivers selected, and where can people go to find out specifically, is River X included in this bill?
Yeah, I can maybe take a stab at that one. So it looks like the rivers were selected based on the nomination process and what Senator Wyden heard. We weren't in the room there to make the decisions. We probably would have protected, if it were up to us, we'd protect all 110,000 miles of streams and rivers in Oregon. But I think that was really how it was done. I think they've probably done their political calculus of what rivers had the most support, and that's what oftentimes ends up in legislation. If there's a river out there that only one person casually nominated it, it might not have made it on the list. So that said, if there is a river that is not on the list that you think should be, by all means, thank the senators for their introduction of legislation and suggest whatever other river you think should be included. This is, again, this is a congressional or piece of legislation that is by no means final. So there will be opportunities where this will go through a committee and the public can weigh in at that time. You can weigh in with Senator Wyden now. After the committee hearing, there's a number of steps of engagement here to weigh in, but sooner is better than later. And to see all of the rivers, if you go to the Oregon Wild website, you'll see a number of links that will get you to the Wild and Scenic Rivers page right on our homepage there. That'll show you the map of where all those rivers are. And I think that part of the question was, where is there a list of rivers? The legislative text is really, the way Congress formats their legislation, it's not easy reading. So that's not the best list. There was a KTVZ story that ran, and they had a link to a little bit more of a legible list of rivers. So that would be a good place to check to see if there's a particular river you want to know. Is it in the bill? Is it not in the bill? You can also just download the bill and do a word search to see if it's in there that way.
Everybody's favorite thing. Control searching through a 180-page Word document. Okay, a bunch of folks have also asked about, what is in the Wild and Scenic River corridor, or what's in the Wild and Scenic Rivers buffer, how big is it, what can happen there? Essentially, what is the kind of brief spiel on buffers? What does it mean? What can we do there? What can we not do there?
Yeah, so within that buffer corridor, again, it's, the aggressive type of clear-cut logging not going to be allowed, but all those other types of activities will be those low-impact activities for public lands recreation. Everything from hiking to hunting, camping, fishing, rafting. I think I went through that list a little bit earlier. So all of that is allowed and encouraged within that buffer on either side of the river. Is that answering the question, Damien? I'm not sure I followed it.
I think people are just generally curious about what it means, what can happen there. So I think that's a good general overview. If others have thoughts.
Maybe a couple of things that are actually written into the bill that so it is made really really explicit in this bill is that, for example, restoration of streams is possible. So even though it might mean like, you know, equipment in the stream, if it's restoring salmon habitat, for example, and the value that the river is designated for is salmon, then that's allowed. And then there's also provisions that explicitly make it clear that firefighting, for example, is allowed in wild and scenic rivers and wild and scenic river corridors.
And I think the key word there that you said there, Chandra, was the values, and that's, you know, that's why these outstandingly remarkable values are so key. That are what the rivers are designated to protect. Because when the agencies, be it the Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management, when they go to do their river management planning process after these rivers are designated, then they have to figure out how they're going to protect those values. So that it's a lot more flexible than some other designations where they can go and say, wow, this use is really harming fish, for example, and then they have to look at how they might mitigate for that. So, and you know, I'll note that that's a public process, really focused on public engagement through that process. So not only, you know, do we hope people will be engaged in advocating for this bill and making sure that the rivers and streams that we love stay in it, but also that you're involved throughout that planning process through to the end.
Yeah, someone else asked about, you know, whether there can be like use restrictions and things like that in wild and scenic rivers, and that all comes out as part of the management plans that you mentioned. So the Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management, whichever, you know, federal agency manages the land that the river is flowing through, to develop a management plan. And, you know, as Eric said, you know, how are we going to protect and enhance and not degrade the values it's designated for? And that will all come out in that management plan that the public can be a part of.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that sort of dovetails a little bit with this question. Someone brought up that there are different kinds, like, you know, it could be a recreational river, it could be a scenic river, it could be a wild river. Do any of you want to speak to briefly what the difference is between those or why that matters?
Yeah, I think maybe just the brief answer there is when a river, and this is kind of getting in a little bit into the weeds, but a designated river can be managed as either wild, scenic, or recreational. And I try not to get too lost in the weeds on that because I think it's really more about the values regardless of the classification. So wild is going to likely be, normally if it's designated as wild, it's probably flowing through a roadless natural area that's relatively pristine. If it's a scenic stretch, there's probably some road access and some limited development potentially, but minimal. And then a recreational segment might have a road paralleling it for access. And you could have campgrounds and trails through all these different classifications. And I think someone just mentioned that, you know, there's a lot of room for input on the specifics of how things are managed after Congress designates the river. And, you know, you can suggest there should be more restoration on this stretch, and this is the stretch of river that should have another campground or a trail connector. So that all gets handled more in that management plan, and that's a public process, so everybody can weigh in there.
Yeah. All right, maybe we'll just get the last one or two. And if I know that all of you can also see the chat box, so if one is particularly jumping out at you, please feel free to claim it. But one that I'm curious about is, do we know, maybe we don't know this yet, but is there anything in this bill to help protect and rebuild salmon populations?
Definitely. You know, this is going to protect a lot of salmon habitat and encourage restoration of salmon habitat. So there's a very close link to, you know, arguably one of the goals of this is to help recover salmon and their habitat. And you know, sometimes recovering and helping salmon means protecting the last best habitat and leaving it exactly as nature has taken care of it over the millennia. And sometimes that means doing some active restoration work. So both of which are very relevant and complementary in a wild and scenic river designation.
Awesome. Well, we are over time, so I think 6 minutes over time. So I think I'm going to go ahead and call it here. I'm sorry to the folks that we weren't able to get to your questions, but please feel free to head over to our website, oregonwild.org/rivers. We have compiled a bunch of information there, separated by region on this bill. Oregon Natural Desert Association also has a ton of great information on their website too. And then all of your other favorite groups, you know, American Rivers, American Whitewater, etc. I've seen stuff popping up all over the place, and there are also some great articles in newspapers. So check us out online. And if you have any questions, you know, feel free to reach out to us. But thanks for joining us. This is a really exciting time, and it's great to gather with you all here. And hopefully we will be seeing each other out on the river soon. So thanks to all of you for being here, and thanks to all of our panelists for joining us tonight. Have a good night, everybody. See you soon.